and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I say it all the time, but I am delighted. I am very happy to be with you on another Tuesday, bringing you another author interview. As we get started with this episode, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, subscribe, etc. on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. It really does help the algorithm. Also, if you would like to support the network and this podcast in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. You can leave a tip or a donation. That really does also help not only this podcast, but like I said, the entire network. That's gsmcpodcast.info. When you're there, if you'd like to leave a question or a comment, you can do that as well. I'd be happy to engage with those at the beginning of the following episode after receiving said question or comment. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.info if you want to support this podcast in a monetary fashion. So welcome to another author interview. I hope your week is going well. It is just trucking right along through October. I saw a meme on, I think, Facebook today that said something like, September went fast, but October is just flying by at like 75 miles per hour. And it really is. It's crazy how quickly this month is going. But here we are in the last weekish, 10 days. Weekish? I don't even know what day it is. Last little bit of October. And I hope that you are having a good fall. Maybe you are planning on what you're going to do for Halloween. A friend of mine is a social worker, and part of her job every year is organizing the trick-or-treating at the hospital that she works at. And she just sent me the picture of all of the big plastic bins that they have with all of the candy. And Halloween isn't really a thing here. It's you can find little bits and pieces of it. I think actually our village is having a Halloween parade this year, so I'm excited about that. But she sent me the picture of just the huge buckets of candy that they are getting ready to hand out to the trick-or-treaters, and I said I wanted to swim in it like Scrooge McDuck swims through his gold. Because no trick-or-treating here. I do miss handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. I just like seeing them and what costumes they've created, etc. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. How was your weekend? Ours was good. We made pizza. We had friends over, and we hadn't seen since April. Just life there, getting ready to move, and we've been busy with lots of other things. And so the last time I saw them, I know it was in April when they came to celebrate my birthday. So we invited them over. They came for pizza. We made pizza, homemade pizza, which is always fun. And just hung out and chatted and got caught up on life a little bit. So that was nice. And it was Saturday, I had this interview. I can't remember if I did anything else on Saturday. Is that terrible? I know I did the interview. At least I remember that. It was a lot of fun. So it was a good way to spend part of my Saturday. But yeah, that's a little life update. Let's go ahead and talk about it's actually books this week, not book. We are talking about the first two books in a series. It's called The Adventures of the Flash Gang. The first two books are Experiment and Treasonous Tycoon, as you see next to me, and they are called episodes 1 and 2. I'm just going to give you the description of episode 1. I don't want to give too much away about the series, but this is middle grade, and the Adventures of the Flash Gang, Episode 1, Exploding Experiment. The description is as follows. That brief, blinding dazzle, the blue smudge and lingering stink, the Flash Gang has struck again. They are the most notorious thieves in Pittsburgh, food-stealing crooks the police and newspapers say are highly trained and very dangerous. But 11-year-old Lewis Carter isn't a thief, he's just homeless and hungry. The Flash is a recipe he invented from bits of his missing father's scientific research. He uses it to pinch his dinners. It's been going pretty well until now. Now his recipe is stolen, and he is in the clutches of some rather nasty people. Enter tutu-wearing, starry-eyed, and all-around extraordinary, she will tell you, Pearl Alice Clavell. She's on a mission to uncover a nefarious deed she's convinced involves the Flash Gang. Rescuing Lewis is right up her alley. Truth is, a nefarious deed is afoot, one that threatens the entire country. It will take Lewis and Pearl joining forces to save the recipe and themselves against an enemy who will stop at nothing, including kidnapping and very possibly murder. And that's just the description of episode 1 of The Adventures of the Flash Gang. Look at the that first cover, because you see them running away. This is so indicative of their relationship. So you've got Lewis running, very determinedly running, looking scared, running away from something clearly, and then there's Pearl next to him in a tutu. And she doesn't seem concerned, really. She's maybe doing a pirouette or about to do a balletic leap of some sort, and that's just very, very, very indicative of their relationship. These two books are so much fun. If you have a middle grade reader who likes adventure, these are historical fiction, also taking place in the Depression era 30s in Pittsburgh, and lots of adventure, lots of found family, just some really good themes and great friendships. So much fun. But let's go ahead and I didn't say the names of the authors, M.M. Downing and S.J. Waugh, as you hopefully saw on the book covers. That was an oversight on my part. I do apologize. Sandra and Melanie are joining me, M.M. Downing and S.J. Waugh. And so let's go ahead and turn now to that interview with Sandra and Melanie. Sandra and Melanie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here.
I'm excited to talk about the first two books in your Adventures of the Flash Gang series. Before we do that, though, if both of you would just take a few moments to share a little bit about each of you so my listeners can get to know you, that'd be great. And whoever wants to go first.
Me? So this is Sandra. I had to write this so I could think it through in one sentence. But basically, I'm a mom, a wife, a friend, a sibling, mostly a hermit when I can be a hermit, a rescue dog owner / lover and writer. And I have one foot in New York City, the other in an old farmhouse in rural Connecticut. And I love books, gardens, and imaginary worlds. And I spend as much time as I can in all.
Oh,
Nice. Thank you.
I didn't
Melanie?
write anything down. I will just tell you.
Better.
You're good.
My name is Melanie, and I live in New Jersey with 2 teenage daughters, 2 cats, my husband, a dog. I was trained in the theater. I worked as an actress in my 20s and then transitioned to publishing. And I also love gardens and animals. I would have a farm full of animals if I could. And I'm very happy to be writing with Sandra.
Wonderful. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I know it's a really hard question because how are you supposed to take decades and just kind of
Yeah.
shove them into several sentences?
Yeah.
So, Sandra, I too would be a hermit if given the opportunity. It's
I know.
nice to just, cozy up somewhere. But as I said, The Adventures of the Flash Gang, there's currently 2 episodes, 2 books. So how about Melanie, can you give an overview of the series?
Yeah, it's an adventure series set in 1930s Pittsburgh, set against the backdrop of the Great Depression. And it is about a group of orphans who are having to fend for themselves, live on their own. And so much of the book is showing how they do that. And then they come up against a Nazi adjacent sympathetic plot that becomes their mission of taking down these American businessmen who are sympathetic to the Nazi cause and want to bring that sort of government over to the United States. So it's a bit caperish. It's very funny. It's very dedicated to the idea of you can find your own family and make your way, even if you are dealt a hard hand.
Yeah. And there are the first 2 books out. So it's always a little hard to talk about 2 books without giving a lot of spoilers in terms of, first and second. So we'll try to avoid some of that. But Sandra, what was your inspiration for the series itself?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think what Melanie and I say is that when we got together, we wanted to write books that we loved to read when we were growing up. And so we those were mostly Dickensian, back alleys, little thrill orphans were a big part of it. So it kind of started from there. And then we wanted to do this Dickensian type style thing. And one thing to do is to take it out of the contemporary situation where you have media and technology and all that and let kids fend for themselves. So there you have it. That's where it started. And we're thinking about back alleys and smoggy, foggy skies. What better than Pittsburgh in the 1930s?
Yeah, if you're going for that Dickensian London smog fog feel, that's a good. And the Depression, of course, makes sense as well, because you have unfortunate but understandable reasons why you've got so many orphans, why you've got so many young people living on the streets. The Flash Gang, we've got a main character, Lewis, who has what he calls the recipe, which he uses. Where did that come from? We're not blowing things up, but we are making loud, flash, bangy kind of situations.
Not as much. I'm sorry, Melanie, I'm jumping in.
ahead.
It's not actually extremely loud. It's more like a whoosh.
Right. Okay.
But it's incredibly,
brighter,
because we didn't want to scare people. We wanted to give him something that he could use to work undercover to pinch some food for himself and for the soup kitchen at St. Patrick's Church in Pittsburgh. And anyway, so that's it stems from some leftovers from his father, who's a professor, some experiments, and in Lewis's desperate attempt to stay able to take care of himself, he kind of discovered this flash and was using it. Melanie, you're probably better at describing this.
Just going to say that when we came up with this idea of orphans fending for themselves, one of the real exciting questions for us was, if you are a 12-year-old kid, an 11-year-old kid, what is your challenge? How do you feed yourself and keep yourself out of the elements and, live to see another day? And we pretty quickly realized you'd have to be very spry and agile and quick fingers and clever and be able to assess a situation and slip in and out. And then we tried to up the stakes by saying, well, what if you couldn't do those things? What if you couldn't slip in and out? What if you weren't agile? What if you had breathing problems? What if you were slow? What would you do? How would you do this? So we kind of
you just described me.
Exactly. Like, how would I survive when I'm slow and lumbering and I need to sneak food? And then when we kind of started thinking about that question, we came up with the idea of you use your wits, you use your brains. And from that, the character of Lewis was born, who is physically challenged. He has breathing problems. He's not fast, but he's incredibly smart. And he has these tools left over from his missing father that he is able to mix and match until he is able to create a way for himself to steal food, which is by creating a distraction. It won't hurt anybody, but it is exciting and it's bright and it is a little stinky, and he sneaks in, he gets his food, he's out, and then he's taken care of. He solved his problem of how can he get food without being fast. And that's kind of where the Flash was born.
And I love that the papers have all these theories about it's a whole gang and they're stealing food, and it's really just this kind of scrawny, maybe 11, 12-ish year old boy
with glasses and bad vision. And those scenes, I think, were really fun to write, where the kids and the adults were all the conjecture of who could the Flash Gang be. I think Sandra and I had so much fun writing those conversations and those scenes and all the speculation in the book of who it could be. And meanwhile, it's just this one scrawny, lonely boy who is relying on what his gifts are, which is he's smart. He can figure out a science way to solve his problem.
I think that what Melanie was just saying about Lewis being, there's all the speculation on who the Flash Gang could be, how many people are in the gang, and what their nefarious purposes might be. But it really is just one scrawny, lonely boy who's trying to survive being homeless and not knowing where his father is, and a lot of different things. And I think that's important, because that's where we start with this book, is with Lewis, who is lonely. He is trying to survive. He's making his way the best way he knows how, but he is, like she said, scrawny. He's got breathing problems. He needs glasses. He's not the bravest or the toughest, but he does have his intellect and his wits about him. So he has a lot of good things that he brings to the table. Now, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, remember that pink tutu we were just talking about a little while ago in the book? We are going to talk about the other main character of this episode, this series as well, and that is Pearl, Miss Pearl Alice Clavell, in all of her pink tutued glory. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Mm-hmm. 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 Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and my second and final really quick reminder that you can support this podcast and the entire network monetarily by going to gsmcpodcast.info. If that is something you're interested in doing, all of your support is greatly appreciated, no matter what form that support comes in. But if you do want to go to gsmcpodcast.info, there you can leave a tip or a donation. Before the break, we were talking about Lewis, one of the main characters of the Flash Gang adventures, the adventures of the Flash Gang, and he is the first one that we meet. We are about to meet Pearl. Let's go ahead and return to the interview with Sandra and Melanie. I love how you describe yourselves in your bio on your website, the way that you're kind of, 1920s detectives. So, with secret identities, but how much of the two of you is involved in Pearl? Because let's talk about Pearl.
I wish I was Pearl.
I think we both love Pearl. Pearl just showed up. We're both, I think Sandra and I are very theatrical, and we're very imaginative, and we're both, and Pearl is those things. Pearl gets a thought in her head, and it starts to spin and grow and become, it's the most fantastical probability is what she expects, right? She doesn't expect anything mundane or normal. Things are very heightened. At the same time, she's very loyal and very smart and has a real sense of morality that kind of informs the books, that kind of leads the kids to, decide what's important, what's worth fighting for. I'm speaking in generalities because I don't want to give away too much, but she's basically a kid with a really big imagination, who happens to be right most of the time. Go ahead, Sandra. I think you can maybe.
No, I think you did it. And you're trying not to give anything away, so I'm hoping I'm not. But
No,
I also think we wanted to play against type, where, so many wonderful characters. When you get a girl in a book with gumption, they tend to be tomboys, and we were like, you don't have to be a tomboy to have gumption and drive and commitment. So we were kind of playing with that, and that's part of Pearl too. So
she's
and
very
when we
pretty.
meet her, I'm sorry, Melanie.
She's very pretty, and she's very girly, and she wears her pink tutu and walks around Pittsburgh in ballet slippers.
Yeah,
unapologetically.
That's exactly what I was going to say. When we first meet her, she is in pink head to toe. It's a tutu. There's ballet slippers. You're like, this is just, you're going to be filthy. You're not wearing appropriate foot gear.
Yeah.
And she doesn't care.
No, and she and Lewis are kind of flip sides of the same coin, because they work really well together, but they, while they have the same goal, they're coming about it from very different perspectives. And Pearl is not afraid to just jump in without looking.
That's a wonderful way to put it. That is exactly what Pearl is.
Learning how to become friends. I mean, or not even learning, but just becoming friends is such a part of the book too. Like, you can come from completely different sides, but have this basic core that connects you. And I think
one thing that we can talk about with book 2 without really giving a lot of plot away is the flood. So one thing that you talk about in both books is trying to take something from that time period and working it into the plot, whether that's completely 1000% accurate or not. So talk about the decision to include, the St. Patrick's Day flood in book 2.
I think it came a little bit by accident. I mean, when we chose 1935, it wasn't that we knew that this was the exact year we needed to start, but it just sort of fell into, it was like, okay, 1935. And then when we were researching, we discovered things that were happening in 1935 that led right into what we were writing about. And then looking a year later, which is where book 2 takes place, they've been together, the gang's been together for a year. We were looking at historical things. We were like, wow, there's a flood. There's an enormous flood in the middle of Pittsburgh. And then it
That
just
actually happened.
It
That
totally happened. Yeah.
So
And
we didn't take too much license. Especially Sandra's very dedicated. I mean, we were very conscious of being historically accurate. We take, to heart the idea that kids might be learning most of what they know about the Great Depression through our books. So we wanted to be accurate. And that flood did happen, and it did devastate the parts of Pittsburgh that are devastated in our book.
Yeah.
So it was a gift as a storyteller because we had just like this natural event.
climactic moment.
Yeah, that we could build to. And there's also one in book 1 rather, that is not a flood, but also a natural event that actually did happen.
Yeah. But I will say that within trying to be historically accurate, obviously we take a lot of license with the Flash and so forth. So little fiction within the historical
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, but I think it's good that we don't know exactly what the Flash is, that you don't try to go into a whole big scientific background, because we're talking about middle grade readers and they're in it for the adventure. They're in it to, have fun and maybe learn a little history along the way, but not necessarily for a large science lecture on how chemicals react.
Yeah.
I don't think we could write that. I don't think either of us is writing a accurate chemistry book anytime soon.
Sure. Historical fiction is always fun because there's, you have to research certain times, certain places, etc. Were there, obviously we've highlighted a couple of events that, a flood for one, but were any other particular areas of research that stood out for either of you?
Sandra?
Well, I always say it started with a map. And so I think when we're first talking about it, neither of us are from Pittsburgh. So, the first thing is just to look at the topographical area and how it sort of plays into it. And finding a map that was from the 1930s was very important. I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but to me, seeing visually where these kids can be placed and the changes. I mean, the downtown Pittsburgh is not the way it was back in the 1930s. So sort of recreating everything and that kind of attention to detail historically was particularly fun for me. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
I think the research part of writing the book was such a gift. We discovered so many things that fed into our storytelling and fed into our characterization of these kids, details we didn't know that were just like almost tailor-made for what we were trying to accomplish in terms of setting, having it be a challenging place to try to make your way. And then also just the sort of historical moment of what was happening politically in the 30s. And, we ended up finding, I think in the beginning, we were like, well, let's just make the bad guy the opposite of them, which is someone who has a lot of money. And when we were researching that, we realized there was this whole movement actually happening in the 30s that is maybe a little underreported and underknown of, these businessmen who really were sympathetic to the Nazi government in Germany and wanted to bring some of that over here. So that we did not have any inkling of really when we were starting to write that, when we were like, let's write orphans in Pittsburgh, we didn't know that. So researching that it just gave us all of our conflict, all of our story, all of our big picture questions of what's important. Is it important to just make sure you have a meal, or is it important to make sure everybody's taken care of? So I think the research was invaluable to what the finished products of the book became. Yes, Sandy?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, you're right. The idea of like, well, we need a bad guy, and so who are the worst guys? Well, Nazis. And then so it was like, oh, we'll foil a Nazi plot in the 30s. And then to realize there actually were a lot of Nazi plots.
Yeah.
And that there was a huge rise of fascism in the States back then, and real efforts to bring that to the fore. And so, as Melanie said, that kind of, I'm feel woefully uneducated that I didn't know that, but it was great to find out and study that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been in the last 5 years that I learned about even some of the Nazi rallies, and there's film footage of, I think especially in New York, there were some in New York City.
The one in 1939 was particularly huge.
Yeah.
The one that's in our book actually took place in, I think it was 34,
That
which
was
is
a real
little
event.
known.
But it talked about in the book, but that was actually a real event at Madison Square Garden, and you can find both.
Yes, Madison. Yeah, that's.
But yeah, they both took place at Madison Square Garden. But yeah, the one that everyone knows about is the one in 1939, or not everyone, but the more celebrated one.
Yeah, which, I mean, I think it's important to know that it was here in the States, and not just in Europe or other places. But what were the challenges or the fun parts of either way you can choose about writing in such a different technological time? So you've got kids with no cell phones. If they want to, get a hold of someone, they either have to physically find them or, I mean, just talk about that process.
Personally, I love that. I love taking away, the tools one can use to make things easier. And I love that children have to be resourceful. I mean, children are very resourceful when given the opportunity. So it was like sort of opening the gate and letting them loose. I think we call their method of communication across the city with all these street orphans a streeter brigade. And that it sort of, these little things came to us, but it was like, what would you do if you didn't have a telephone to reach someone? Well, it's almost like playing telephone. It's like you tell this person tells this person, and it shoots across the city. So things like that were, I think, fun. Melanie?
Yeah, they don't have, I think it's actually really interesting when we encounter kids who are buying the books to talk about, like, well, what would you do if you didn't have a wristwatch? Like, it's not like you can say, meet me at 10. Like, you have to find a clock in the town to find out what time it is. So it was really fun to take away all those things that would make their lives easier, like everything. Like, there's nothing to make their life easier. There's no communication devices. There's no, they can't just pick up a phone and call for help. Like, there's no phones at all. No landlines. Like, I have to go to a place that has a telephone. And as you said, like, it required a lot of walking. So we have a lot of scenes where they're just like trying to get from one part of Pittsburgh to another part of Pittsburgh. And again, how do you do that? How do you go 2 miles away if you're walking on ballet slippers? Like, what do you do? So, I mean, we love stripping away the technology. I mean, I think it kind of allowed us to come up with some creative scenes and creative challenges. And then there's a simplicity to it too, because the kids have to really talk to each other, which it's getting lost.
Yep. And, they're not getting formal education because they're all living on the streets, but they're certainly getting education of interesting varieties.
Yes.
Street smarts.
When you think about do you have a number of episodes in mind? I'm sure you've got an ending to your arc, but is that set in stone, or is it fluid? What's going on with the number of books?
It's a trilogy.
Okay.
So
it's set in stone right now.
Comes out in March. Yeah. It's funny. We've talked about if we continued the series, and we realized as we were writing, because the children do age a little bit. I mean, there's a year takes place between book 1 and book 2, that they would keep growing, and they would be of age to be in the military by the time World War II came around. And that was quite a shock. But Go ahead,
Wow,
Melanie.
yeah.
I think there were two options. We could have just kept it static in the same time period and just spun out adventure after adventure after adventure. But I don't think we're creatively excited by that. We liked the idea of a beginning, a middle, an end. The book starts with Lewis trying to find his dad, and that story spans the 3 episodes. The third one again comes out in March of 2025. And that seemed like a natural, nice ending to us. Like that felt right to tell a complete story rather than just spin out a serial of adventures, which we could have done. Like we had the framework to do that. But and then we started talking about, as Sandy just said, well, what if we wrote books as them as teenagers? They'd be in World War II. So
Yeah.
maybe that might happen down the road someday. That would be for an older reader, probably.
I was just going to say it would be a different
Yeah.
feeling of a
Definitely.
book. Yeah. I can see moving the series along with the characters, but it would definitely be a very different feel and tone with them being teenagers and potentially being involved in the war in some way. I mean, it would be, it would be probably for older readers as well, potentially a darker series, but you can see how that might work. But again, it would definitely be different, and different isn't always bad. So I don't know. We're gonna go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, The Adventures of Lola Lavender. What is that? Well, you're just gonna have to wait and see. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with authors M.M. Downing and S.J. Waugh. Of course, we're talking about their Adventures of the Flash Gang series. Trilogy, actually, as it turns out. We were just talking about the arc and how many books they expect, and it is a trilogy, third one coming out in March, which is both exciting because trilogy, third one coming out in March, always good, something to look forward to, but it's so much fun, and it would be fun to kind of carry on with the adventures. But let's go ahead and continue with the adventures, but this time the adventures of Lola Lavender, as I mentioned before, but the adventures of this conversation as well. But if you just wrote adventures, I mean, you do have that a little bit, because what's the name of the radio show that Pearl loves?
The Adventures
Our
of Lola
favorite part of the
Lavender.
book, and we don't talk about it enough. Go ahead, Sandra, say the names of it.
It's The Adventures of Lola Lavender, isn't it?
Yeah, The Adventures of Lola Lavender. This was Sandra and I being just complete silly kids making up silly. The conceit is that Pearl loves this radio show because in the 30s there was, you couldn't turn on your TV, there was no streaming. You listened to the radio every week at the same time for a new adventure, and she's obsessed with this character named Lola Lavender. And there happens to be Lola's sidekick named Sir Nigel, and Pearl thinks that Lewis is her Sir Nigel. And each week the radio show comes up with a more preposterous absurd plots. And we had so much fun coming up with just the silliest, and they're throwaway mentions. Pearl just throwaway mentions, different plots of Lola Lavender, and they're all absurd. We had so much fun coming up with them.
Coming up with the titles too.
We just would come up with titles. They're all alliterative titles, which we echo in the actual Adventures of the Flash Gang titles. So the alliterative 2-word title. The first book is called Exploding Experiment, and the second book is
Treasonous Tycoon.
And the third book will be called Berlin Breakout. And that naming pattern came from our Lola Lavender episodes, which are also, but they're like, hearse hijinks and silly titles.
But those are fun because you don't have to come up with those ridiculous plots. Like you can throw away 2 lines of, and then there's a tiger and she trains it to be in the circle, whatever it is, but you don't actually have to make that.
I think there's one where she lives with a family of beavers.
Beavers, yes. An indefatigable heroine is what we wanted.
But I also love that there is an adult character that they meet and who befriends them, he's right there with Pearl. She can throw something out and he'll say, yeah, that's episode 56, which
our nice reporter Osgood Boone. Yes, he's a good. It's nice to have a mentor, so to speak, even though he's not really a mentor. He's good in a pinch, I guess.
When we were writing the book, we at some point realized they needed at least one friendly adult. Like there needed to be, a friendly adult. So we came up with this Boone character, and he became one of our favorites to write as well. And yeah, he also listens to Lola Lavender, which made Pearl really like him.
Yeah, of course. You said book 3 comes out in March. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. And again, we don't want to give too much away, but it's good to know that it's coming out in March. When it comes to writing together, what is your process for co-authoring? How does that work for the two of you?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, you can start.
I would say a lot of compromise, a lot of listening, a lot of consistency is important too. And that if we're going to write, we're going to write, and I'm going to hand you something and you're going to hand me something, and that we keep going even when we're feeling like not able to keep going. And I think we are also lean or try to celebrate each other's strengths. As you can see, Melanie is extremely good at being very specific, and she's the structure maker. And then I do a lot of icing details. So yeah, we also had to learn to kill our darlings, as they say. So you had to be, you just had to be able to let go.
I think she's making it sound like it's more full of conflict than it actually is. I mean, we were very collaborative and just naturally people who want to defer to the other person. We had weekly phone calls for many, many years, just doing thought exercises like, well, what if we have Pearl do this? Okay, let's play that out and see what happens. And does that inspire us? Does that leave us in a corner we can't get ourselves out of? We had a lot of conversations like that. Practically, as Sandra said, we were very diligent about, okay, you're going to write this many pages, you're going to write this many pages, and we'll trade them. That was kind of the feeling out for the first book. And then by the time we made it through second book and third book, we had it was refined into a real nice system where we would just work it out by phone what we were going to do. And Sandra would usually do the drafting by the third book, I would say. And then we just, by that time, had the voice down. We had it's not a Sandra Waugh book and it's not a Melanie Downing book. It's S.J. Waugh and M.M. Downing have their own voice together. And we had kind of discovered that. So by the third book, it was easy to just be in the flow of how that worked. But we would occasionally have to kill a darling, but we would also have to be like, listen, I know that in chapter 15, I really want XYZ to happen. And almost always the other person, if it was something one of us felt really passionate about, we'd be like, okay, that's what we'll do then. And we'll make it work. So it was, I think, a great writing challenge. I've grown so much as a writer working this way. So I endorse it. Endorse writing with a partner and learning how to do that.
So
you have your built-in writers group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You live in different states. So what started this co-authoring process? How did you decide you wanted to write together?
Well, we met in a writers group.
Okay.
So we sort of met in New York City once a month, was it? With some other wonderful authors. And it was just one of those moments where you're like, I'd really like to work on a book with Melanie. And she was very agreeable. So that's how it happened. So then, but most everything happened by phone. That, we just talked a lot on the phone.
I don't know if we could pinpoint for you the last time we were in the same room together.
That's true.
Well, then it's a good thing you are not in 1930s.
It is very good.
You need the
We have to
phone.
send our ideas by pigeon.
Exactly. A lot of walking.
Exactly. Well, snail mail, it would be a completely different experience.
Yes.
Book 3 is done. Are you considering writing together again? Are you working on anything together right now?
Something cooking. We've
yeah.
something cooking.
Yeah, I think when we finished this story, I mean, we both write separately too. And I think when we finished this story, there's a part of us that was like, that was a good thing. And I don't quite want to lose that. So yeah, the idea of working more together is there. And yeah, I think it's a riff on our bios that you said you liked about, people in the
The new
20s.
idea. The new idea is a riff on
Yeah.
our bios.
We were like,
I think we kind of figure that our niche is historical fiction. We both like historical fiction. I think we like
taking away the social media and the
yeah, we like
technology.
that. We're also history buffs naturally. It's fun, I think, to write a story set in historical times. And then we really feel strongly that the golden part of the Flash Gang is the idea of found family. So anything that we work on going forward will probably always have that. I think that it's kind of like, me and Sandra, like we're a found writers family together, and that kind of transcends and comes out on the page of characters who are, living maybe in different states or whatever, who come together and work together and create something stronger than the sum of its parts. So the new idea is historical and found family.
With always some action adventure and swashbuckling moments thrown in.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean,
why not?
yeah, you gotta have that. I love historical fiction. And you're not the first authors to say, taking away some of those modern technologies, modern comforts, is helpful to the writing process in a lot of ways. And I love to read historical fiction as well, but sometimes I'm like, time travel books where they go back and that's that kind of historical fiction where you find a modern person is back in whatever time. And I think, yes, but I don't know if I want to be that time traveler who now has no hot water or no XYZ. The technology is one thing, but depends on how far back you end up going. But
I would not want to live without like my coffee maker for sure.
Yeah. Any time period you would consider living in, either of you?
Well, speaking of no hot water, I always loved medieval stories and Elizabethan stories. And then of course the reality is everybody's got fleas and lice and they stink, and I really don't want that. So it's always I always romanticize any period of history. So the reality is not what I want, but I think there are moments in history that across the board that are just powerful and I don't know, just inspirational. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I was never mind. But yeah, I like a lot of periods of history.
Yeah.
I would like to live in the 1850s, maybe the 1840s. It's modern enough. But there's still horses and no cars. I think that's a good sweet spot of comfort.
Or Jane Austen.
Yeah. Well, yeah, something
she's
like that.
before that, but
Yeah,
that would be.
But something with, I always think the 1800s are very fascinating to me. So I would live then, I think.
How do you feel about corsets?
I love horses. I want a million animals around me all the time. I don't
No,
know.
Corsets. Corsets, not horsets.
I think
Corsets. How do you feel about corsets?
Not great.
Yeah. Horse is good.
Horse is good. Corset's bad.
Yeah.
I would put up with it, I think.
Okay. You both write as yourselves, for lack of a better way of putting that. You write separately. Melanie, do you want to talk a little bit about what you write?
I've written adult books in the past. Back in the day, it was called chick lit, probably romantic comedies. I've written some YA books. I'm working on a Regency set romance series right now for myself. This is the only time that I've ever written for a younger reader with Sandra on these books. So I'm a little bit of I have a finger in many different pots. I always have a million different ideas, a million different age groups. The only thing I would say I don't really write mysteries or thrillers or what would you say, like fantasy books, I guess. But yeah, I like a romantic comedy. That's probably my favorite thing to read and my favorite thing to write.
No space opera for you?
Probably not, unless there was a good romance.
Yeah.
Unless there was a good romance there. Romantic storyline, rather.
Yeah. Sandra, how about you?
So I'm kind of the opposite from Melanie, which is that I love the romance part, but I'm more romance in a fantasy or an action adventure or a thriller. I I the first books I wrote were a fantasy series for YA and a young adult. And then I didn't think I was an historical writer, but suddenly I found that I have something that's set in 1893 Chicago, and then I have something that's kind of between a couple of worlds of, Victorian London and contemporary times and so forth. And so, yeah, I guess I write some historical or historic backdrop stories,
Mhm.
but they're fantasy and and one's a thriller. So
All
I'm
right.
like you.
Thank you. I often ask about advice for aspiring authors. Since you are co-authors, let's take it from that angle. Can you give advice for, if people want to write together, what would you tell them?
Find somebody with your own sensibility. I mean, make sure you're trying to accomplish the same goal. If it's not going to work, if someone wants to write a science fiction book and you want to write an animal tale, like, you know what I mean? You've got to find somebody who has your same work ethic. For Sandra and I think we found somebody who we complement each other. Like I'm very good at coming up with like the plot points and the structure, and she's, probably the most beautiful sentence writer I've ever met. So we complement each other in that way. And I would just say someone that you admire, like someone that you can learn from. You want to feel like every time you hang up the phone or exchange pages, you've gained something. I know that's kind of big picture, but I think it helps you keep going. It helps you keep stretching and then just somebody who you like working with. Like you get to choose. Like you're not going to get stuck with someone you don't like. You can choose someone that you like.
It's not a group project
It's
in
not a
college.
group project. It's not assigned. You get to find the person and be like, you're the one I want to work with. And then a lot of honest conversation. I mean, we had so many honest conversations, I think.
And then just playing. I think when we first started, we had no idea what we were going to write together when we first started, and we started throwing out ideas, and then we started writing based on some of those ideas. And I don't think we could tell you how many pages we tossed before the actual Flash Gang story arrived. But we were open, and we kept at it. And so yeah, so I would say if you're going to do it, everything Melanie said, plus then sit down and actually write.
I think in the beginning, we weren't even setting out necessarily to publish anything. We were just trying to play and like, what's it like to write together and to give each other ideas and then go forward. And it just kind of became a standing date of every week we would talk and play and imagine and go home and set it down to paper or computer screen. And then over time, it was like, well, we've got something here. We've got something here that we don't want to just stick in a drawer. We want it to have life. We want other readers to read it. And that built over time. I do think you could probably work together already knowing you want to publish something, but I think it kind of organically came to the two of us. We more just liked writing with each other.
Yeah.
And had
That's
some fun
nice.
conversations and, what if?
And as Melanie said, such a learning experience to use each other's strengths. It was an incredible process.
Yeah. I like the way they talk about how they came to be writing partners. It reminded me of, maybe this only makes sense in my own brain, but like being really good friends before you get married, or, maybe just being friends before you get married, something along those lines. Just wanting to write together and not necessarily doing it because they wanted to publish, but I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Made sense in my own brain. Let's take a break, and we'll take a break from my brain as well. When we come back, we'll be talking about the paths that both Sandra and Melanie took to writing as individuals. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with authors M.M. Downing and S.J. Waugh. Before the break, we were talking about their relationship as co-authors, and now we'll talk more about how they came to writing in general. Let's return now to the interview. In terms of writing for both of you, is it something that you, Sandra, we'll start with you. Did you always want to write? Did you start out, as a kid thinking you wanted to write, or did that come to you later in life? What was your path?
My path was, no, I didn't think I was going to be a writer when I was young. My father was a writer, and that was not very glamorous. And I always wanted an extremely glamorous career, and I always wanted to be an actress. So that was my passion. And life happens, it doesn't work out. And then I realized over time that I was always writing when the chips were down, and that I was always going back to stories in my head. And somewhere much later I thought, well, let me see if I can do something with this. And that's how it happened.
And Melanie, you said you started in theater. So then how did you end up writing?
I started in theater. I always loved, what I loved about theater was the working together to tell a story. And at some point in my 20s, I realized, quite shockingly, like I didn't really like to be looked at. I liked a little bit of an anonymity. And so being a performer really wasn't my comfort zone. And then I got a job working in a publishing company, and I realized that like the storytelling skills I had learned as an actor, breaking down a play, beats, that kind of thing, translated. And while I was working on other people's stories, then I just started thinking, I have my own stories I could use as my creative outlet. So it all just kind of fed into each other. I think the overriding consistency to everything I do is I just like being part of a story. Like I like being part of, whether I'm writing it or performing it or editing it or whatever. I like being part of the creative process of bringing forth a story. And I like the community part of it. So it's perfect for me to write with somebody, because I love when you're making something together. So that's kind of how I came to it, writing. I'm not formally trained, but I read a lot. I read, and I, you write by writing, really.
Yeah. So when you read a lot, Melanie, what for you, what are your go-to genres and authors?
I do love Dickens, and I know it sounds hokey, but I love all the books set in the 1850s, Elizabeth Gaskell and Jane Eyre's a little bit earlier, but I do love all those things. I tend to read those. I will try, since we've been writing middle grade, I've been reading a lot of middle grade fiction, there are some amazing writers out there and amazing books. And it's sad to me that middle grade is having a struggling moment right now, because there's so much there. So I would say the past 2 years, it's been a mix of reading for pleasure, which for me is something written 200 years ago, and then reading middle grade, which is also pleasurable. But
Right.
The reason I choose it is not just to while away hours.
Sure. Sandra, how about you?
I would say my go-to is Jane Austen.
Mhm.
She's what I reread a lot. But I do tend to read, and I'm all over the map, I think, but I do tend to read a lot of middle grade and YA. So right now, Jonathan Stroud and Laini Taylor and Leigh Bardugo are 3 favorites. I love the classics. I love fantasy. I love Hemingway and I love Fitzgerald. So big variety there.
Love it. Thank you. In terms of, you've got a website, so let's talk about internet presence in case people want to learn more about you and the series. Give the website and then any social media that they can either find you separately or together on, whatever you want to share.
Well, our website is downingwaugh.com. It's both last names together. We are on Facebook, Downing Waugh. We are on Instagram, Downing Waugh, TikTok, Downing Waugh, Twitter, X. I'm sorry, it's X now. We're on those things. And then we also, I think, both have our own handles for those things. So sometimes you get 2 for 1 when we're retweeting things. We'll retweet from my account and the group account.
Did you say Instagram and Goodreads? Because we're on those.
Oh,
too.
Goodreads. Goodreads is a good one that we are definitely on, Downing Waugh. And we love people to leave us Goodreads reviews. That's so important to independent small authors, especially for middle grade. Amazon, if you want to give us some stars and just say, great book. That would be wonderful. And I think Instagram is probably the one that we use most often and probably the easiest place to find us. Downing Waugh.
Perfect. We've covered a few different topics during this time, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure either of you wanted to highlight during our time together?
Just that we hope you read our books and buy our books. And if you have a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old reader in your life, especially boys, like the boys really respond to these books. You don't have to start from book 1. You can start from book 2. And the third book comes out March 2025, March 18th. The Adventures of the Flash Gang, episode 3.
I was going to say that people read to escape and to enjoy, to learn, to care, and we sort of just hope our stories bring you all of that.
Thank you. And Sandra and Melanie, thank you both so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me about both books. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you once again to Melanie and Sandra for joining me to talk about the adventures of the Flash Gang. I so enjoyed these 2 books. They are so fun. I can't wait to read the third one and find out how this adventure concludes. It does take place in Berlin, as the title suggests. So that's all we can say because you have to read all of them and find out what happens. But I am very much looking forward to seeing how everything wraps up, to spending more time with Lewis and Pearl. If you have middle grade readers, or if you have younger kids who might enjoy this, that you want to read this with, or you just, somebody who would enjoy this historical fiction, it is so much fun and I highly recommend it. We are getting closer to gift giving season, so you might be looking for books for presents for, I don't know, some holiday or holidays in December. Something to think about. At any rate, thank you again to Sandra and Melanie. I really enjoyed having them on the podcast. I hope you'll join me for the next interview when returning author Hannah Nicole Mayer will join me to talk about Apprentice to the Villain, which is the sequel to Assistant to the Villain. More hijinks will ensue. I had so much fun talking to Hannah when she was here before. Looking forward to talking to her about Apprentice to the Villain and the ongoing adventures of Evie and Tristan. There are many, so looking forward to that. I hope that you will join me. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, and I hope that you are if you've made it this far, please like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching the episode on. Again, it really does help the algorithm. Also, leaving a positive review is wonderful. Thank you so much. Helps tremendously. Doesn't have to be complicated. It's similar to leaving a review for your authors. If you love a book, leave that author a review. It does help a lot. Again, doesn't have to be complicated. Don't be like me. Don't overthink. Can be a simple sentence. I like this book. I like this episode. Whatever. Thank you in advance. If you are on social media and would like to follow the podcast, you may do so on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. I hope you're having a great week. I hope that if whatever fun fall thing you want to involve yourself in is available to you right now, that the weather is changing, that the leaves are beautiful, what have you. Hope you're having a great week. But as always, I hope that week gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to